Hello and greetings.
And today we're going to be discussing Zelda, which this is our first live stream discussing the lore and the universe of The Legend of Zelda, which I'm going to be honest, I'm not as familiar with this universe as our oldest brother is, and as a lot of people are, but I absolutely love this universe. I don't know about you. I love this universe.
A lot of fascinating lore that can be.
Yeah. It's also that I remember being a wee lad, so to speak, as the Scottish would say it. I don't know if we have any Scottish listeners out there, but I remember being très jeune and just watching our oldest brother play the game. And the thing is, he understood the dialogue. I didn't. I was about 2 or 3 years old. I didn't understand any English at the time. And I still was able to follow the story. And because he would explain it to me, he would translate it for me. ACT is just it was just so much fun. And it was a link to the past, because of course it was. It came out around 91 or 92. And I just had a blast watching him. And then, I'd go outside, pick up a stick, pretend to be Link fighting moblins. And our dad encouraged us, as did our oldest brother. And our oldest brother he loved Zelda. He's still a Zelda fanboy. He plays all the games. He's mastered them all. Frankly, he's a better gamer than I'll ever be, or I think than you'll ever be, probably. There's, I think, only Kingdom Hearts I'm better at it than him, but almost every other game he's better.
It really depends on the game.
He's really someone who should have a Twitch channel for gaming. Gosh, he'd actually outdo a lot of Twitch gamers. He is so good, especially at Zelda. Like I've seen him do in under, I think, almost 2-3 hours Ocarina of Time. And it's just, how did you do that? It's
a pity he didn't record it, because
it's just he ended up playing Ocarina like from almost beginning to end, and it was just like 3-4 hours or something. It was incredible.
It's too bad he can't submit it to speedrun communities.
Yeah, I know. It's just, but anyways, when I remember being about 2-3 years old, and I sat in front of the screen, and this was my first brush with fantasy. And my first brush with fantasy that truly awed me to a limited extent was Suikoden. That's when love truly began. But on the other hand, my first encounter with the genre was really with now we did end up interacting with chivalric romances as a child and with the Bible and whatnot, and other religious books or Arthuriana and whatnot. But this was the first modern fantasy story we saw. And I remember our brother just putting down the controller with a smirk and going, "Regardez, look." And then you had he let the prologue play out, and it was the story of the creation of Hyrule. I still remember that moment, and it is such a precious moment. And now I'm realizing it's been almost 30 years since then, probably around like 29 or 28 years since then. Wow, time flies. And it was enchanting. And so this is a creation myth, which, as you guys can see from my geeking out and getting excited about this live stream, is one that's very near and dear to my heart. I don't know about you.
I never really gave it much thought until our brother played Ocarina of Time.
For me, it was A Link to the Past.
Because I didn't get as much into A Link to the Past. I mean, I saw our brother play it.
Because it was his favorite game along with Mega Man X.
Yes, I remember far more Mega Man X.
Yeah, that was our intro to sci-fi.
But I never was truly able to get into the Zelda games.
Yeah. So let's see if we can do that. And there are 3 people watching. I don't know what their story is with Zelda and whatnot, if they have any relationship with it. If you have a relationship and you're really, really impressed by it, do let us know. And we'll be very happy. I just have to close one tab. I forgot to test for the audio. Oop. Shoot. And now I'm having a few minor technical issues. I'm just going to test because I just got so excited. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The audio is working. Goody. Okay. Great. Anyways, I just always have to test because I'm never sure, because sometimes these websites, they don't work. But anyways, as you guys can and gals can all tell, this is a great passion of, it's fantasy. I love all fantasy fiction for the most part.
Yeah.
What's there not to love? It's the modern, or the contemporary equivalent would be the better linguistic term, of medieval chivalric stories. So here we go. The world of Hyrule begins, like most mythological stories, it begins with nothing. It begins with nothingness, and or chaos, as it describes it. Now, by the time Link to the Past had established the story, because you already had 2 Zelda games that came out, and these Zelda stories hadn't built up the mythology yet. They were great games, but they hadn't established the lore in that regard. Now, the games were folded into the universe and kind of made to be part of the overall story in a way, even though it was just an elf boy running around slashing at monsters. And it kind of became the Hobbit to the larger Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings type stories that were told later in Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and a lot of other games and comic books, and even a cartoon. And the story begins with nothing and chaos, and this is where Miyamoto Shigeru, I think it was, who established this universe, is relying on a great deal of precedent within the genre and within chivalric stories. And starting with chaos, there's a reference here to Tolkien as well, because it starts with nothingness. There was one, Eru. And, we have our first person in the chat. Hello, Stephanie Frederick. Because she says hello to the brothers. Let's show that. Yep. And there is nothing at the beginning, and this nothingness is akin to the Ginnunga Gap from Norse mythology. You have Howard, who didn't really get into the creation of the world to an extent, I think. And you have Dragonlance, which certainly got into it in the early 80s, where there was chaos and nothing. Chaos kind of was a little rampant and out of control. High God came in and confined chaos along, and then established the world with the assistance of his children, who then proceeded to essentially put it together to an extent, I think. I think that's how it mostly goes. That said, the world of Hyrule thus begins with a trend that goes back to the Greek myths, to the Norse myths, to a lot of mythology in modern fantasy. And we have Terra Incognita, hello and welcome, decided that we should have a bit of a New Year's Eve live stream. And why not start with one fantasy universe we don't really do as much content on, and this would be a great start for next year, where hopefully we'll start to do a bit more. We won't be able to do it as frequently as Dragonlance, Conan, and Tolkien. I'm just going to be honest with people. We are going to try, but it's a matter that, like the weekly trio of videos along with bi-weekly content in our other channels is really tough to keep up with. And we're going to do our best to have bi-weekly or tri-weekly Zelda stuff when we're not doing Game of Thrones stuff as well, because it takes time to put that together. And on another platform, we're doing a weekly Narnia podcast. So that's where the Narnia content, though, we just take a still image. We don't really do too much editing on it. So it's not that hard. And so we're very, very busy, and we're both starting new jobs soon. So along with the jobs we already do have. So it's just, Zelda's not one I want to put on the back burner, but sadly it's suffered. Anyways, there was chaos and nothing. And this is where it gets exciting. And then the three golden goddesses came down and breathed life. They created the world. And here, it's really, really interesting because you can see, now Miyamoto Shigeru is someone who's very, very smart. And there are times when he kind of fumbles up when he's talking, like in interviews. I've noticed that there are interviews where he fumbles up and he makes stuff up off the top of his head. Mostly when reporters try to corner him, and then he makes something up and tries to answer them. But sometimes, you shouldn't corner the man. He is a genius, but it's like when he's cornered, he'll panic. He needs to bring in notes. And if you try to corner him, he'll make stuff up and he'll just be like, what do I do? And, you don't want him to. You want him to take his time to answer. And I've tried watching a few of his interviews. And when the reporter actually tries to do the, ha, gotcha, I cornered you, it's a bit like he wins for him because it's not that he's mean. He is polite and kind about it, but he's just like, how do I answer this question? And then he comes up with something. And then Nintendo tries to kind of not damage control, but like they kind of go, okay, well, we now got to think about that with the lore and whatnot. And Nintendo tries to, say, all right, how do we veer this into an actual serious thing for our company and our lore, because like the Zelda lore, Nintendo does take it very weirdly, very seriously. Because like Mario is more cartoonish, and lore is not as important with Mario. It's just fun. It's like Mickey Mouse. But Zelda, they keep trying. They keep releasing encyclopedias, and we keep buying them. But it's so hard to keep up with all the lore, and Nintendo keeps trying. Even Pokemon, they keep trying to keep up with the lore, even though I would argue Pokemon don't worry too much about lore. They shouldn't worry too much about it, but they keep worrying about it. So Nintendo's very hardworking there. As a fantasy fan, I really appreciate Nintendo, how far they go. But, anyways, the three golden goddesses created the world of Hyrule. So it's in various depictions stated that they breathed life into it, which suggests that the linguistics there, like in the version I read, was they breathed life into, well, they shaped the world and they breathed life into it. It's almost like they breathed in the chaos and breathed out life or something. And in that regard, there's I think it was in A Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time where it's commented that there's breath as well. And that's almost a reference to Egyptian mythology, where it's believed that your breath is the sustenance, is the key important part to your life force. And they'd often put the ankh in front of the mouth to symbolize life and a bit of a divine connection. Yeah, Terra Incognita really gets it. And this is where I don't tend to like looking at mythology and saying, or fantasy and saying, oh, this is coincidence and whatnot. But even if the creator doesn't realize it, I prefer to look at it as universal unconscious. Something is speaking through him in a way. And he's creating in that moment psychologically, that even if he doesn't realize it, he's hearkening back to an earlier memory in humanity's history and from a previous work of art. Or I'm pretty sure Miyamoto Shigeru had read Tolkien's Legendarium a little. At least he had read Lord of the Rings. By then it was translated into Japanese. And I think he had read it. And I'm fairly suspicious he might have read the Silmarillion by the early 90s. Because the role that the three goddesses assume is more of Eru Iluvatar's role, wherein they create and then they depart. Eru creates the world, but doesn't interact with it directly in the same way that the Valar do. And this is kind of similar to how the three golden goddesses function, or like High God from Dragonlance, who is the main creator god, like Eru, but he doesn't interact. He created the three pantheons of neutrality, light, and darkness, but he doesn't interact with them or with the world, really. And the three golden goddesses, though, take up distinct roles in the creation myth, with Nairu, the goddess of wisdom, who's often, I think, associated with water, isn't she? And yeah, she is with the Zoras. And she's also associated with Zelda.
Her primary color is blue, after all.
The color of truth, royalty, and the sea. So, and hidden depths. So you have a lot of symbolism right there with Nayru. And wisdom can be a lot like boundless. There are hidden depths, and there's something very regal and beautiful about the sea. And Nayru is the one who creates order, it said. She breathes life into order throughout the universe. So she's basically establishing the pecking order of how things work in the universe to an extent, and creating the rules by which everything will be bound. And this role is very, very interesting. Then you get, now the thing about Hyrule is it's a more Celtic universe than anything else. And in that regard, it's fascinating that a Japanese studio decided to create a Celtic world. It's something that I just find very interesting. And oftentimes you see a lot of green with Hyrule, or blue, with green being a very Celtic color. And blue as well for the French, who are inherently part Celtic, part Latin. And so you have Nayru, who creates order, and so I guess you could say she is the goddess of order and of the oceans. I wonder, because I know the one great whale in Ocarina of Time, I forget his name, I think has more connotations with Nayru. And I think the goddess Hylia. But the goddess Hylia's relationship with the three goddesses is a bit of a mystery, I think, to an extent, at least in the context of which one's her mother, or in which deity is her father or something. Or did they just create Hylia? I think that's where I kind of lean. But anyways, but before Nayru created order, we kind of jumped ahead because I misread my notes for a minute. Din created the earth. So Din, being the most powerful deity, created the earth itself. Nayru then instilled it with the order. So Din is creating the earth. And in Ocarina of Time, it's shown that at the beginning it was brown, it was flat. Well, it had hills, but there was no beauty, there was no life. And oftentimes, Din gets the short end of the staff in the literature of Hyrule, because the creators often use the idea of the Triforce, which is the three triangles of power of sorts of Hyrule. You have power, wisdom, and courage. Power seems to be the one that Ganon and the villains often hunger for, although there are a few who I think try to hunger for wisdom. But power more often than not corrupts, and that's really the idea in Zelda. That said, I think it was 2016 or 2017 when we got our first positive aligned Triforce of Power associated, or Din associated character in Sia, who, while started off as a villain, she does get a redemption arc. So we got to see, of course, Sia usurp Ganon and destroy him in one universe, I guess you could say. Zelda's got multiple timelines. It's weird. And she overthrew Ganon in that timeline in the Hyrule Warriors game, which is a great game by Koei Tecmo and Nintendo. A time where you see two studios get along and decide to agree to split the royalties between them, which, if only Western companies knew how to do that to an extent, we might get some interesting products and whatnot. But over in Japan, studios will often coordinate together and actually cooperate. And I do criticize Western studios because they don't seem to do that too often, whereas Eastern ones really do it a lot. And Sia took the power of the Triforce of Power, so she becomes the physical manifestation of Din in a way. But Din, as a character, does not seem to be evil. I know she has what is suspected to be an avatar. I think the Oracle of Seasons, or Oracle of, what was it? I can't remember. Ages. In one of those two games, Din is theorized to have taken up the shape of a Hylian, just as I think Nayru did. And the thing with this possible avatar is that we then got to see that Din is not a figure of evil, but rather a figure of kind of mischief. And
because we do know that Din is associated with the element of fire.
Yeah, which fire has positive and negative connotations, which is fitting.
And I think because fire can be destructive, that's where we associate the fact that Din's part of the Triforce of power, is often
The negative.
The negative, whereas destruction is sometimes necessary for construction.
Yes, and let's also not forget that it was Din who, with her fire and her association also with the earth, which is interesting that they associate it with the earth as well. It molds and shapes the earth. But she molds it, and I would almost argue that, like if you look at the flame imperishable in Tolkien's Legendarium, one could argue it's almost split between the three. But the one most associated with fire would be Din. So she's the one associated the most with the creative force of the universe, really, and real world symbolism in a way. So there's a huge amount of positive and negative symbolism. There's always a positive and negative fiery force in mythology and whatnot. You have Heimdall and Loki. You have Surtur in Norse mythology as well, who's negative fire. You have Amun-Re, who's a positive source of flames and fire and creation. In Japanese myths, you have Amaterasu as a positive force. And so Din, I kind of see shades of Amaterasu with her in a way. And also Brigid, because she's the fire goddess in a way. But that aside, she shapes the earth, she creates the earth. Naru lays down the order and the rules, and then Furore whizzes by and sorry about that. I accidentally pressed a radio on. Sorry. It's right at knee level. Anyways, I should probably see about trying to shut it down. Where is it? Power button. I don't remember where it is. Whatever. But anyways, where was I? Furore creates the flora and fauna, basically life. And this is a very, very important role. But what's interesting is that in some games, Furore is associated with green fire. Like, you know what I mean? She has her spells take on a fiery shape, but it's green. Green being a color of eternity and often associated with Celticness. But the fact that it's fire suggests, once again, fire of creation in a way. But on the other hand, she's associated with forests and trees and the earth as well. And so she's a more forest, tree, earth goddess of sorts.
And it's interesting because in a lot of media, mythology, and fantasy, courage is often associated with fire. But here, the goddess of wind is associated with courage.
Yeah, she's associated with air and wind. I think life being breathed into existence, here it's another Egyptian mythology reference in a way. If you think about Thoth, I think it often is, holding up the Ankh to the mouth. But on the other hand, I wonder if you look at the trees, and the forests, like the Lost Woods and whatnot. In Zelda, you have to do a lot of exploration of forests. It's fun aspects and annoying aspects when you look at the Lost Woods. But what's interesting about Zelda is, the wind/forest is a source of courage. In a way, Furore is the Radagast of Hyrule, and she's also the Gandalf in a way. But I wonder if maybe this is a bit of Miyamoto Shigeru's own childhood reflecting a little in his mythology. Because as a kid, he would run off into the forest into the woods near his home. And what he would do is he'd pick up a stick and pretend he's a great hero on a great quest and fight what he later drew, I think had someone else draw, was to be moblins, or what we would describe in the West as more orcs, pigmen of sorts. Although orcs have, through Tolkien's mythology and whatnot, kind of taken a different shape. But the thing with Miyamoto Shigeru here is that it's almost impossible to separate the creator from the art. And I think that of his childhood memories of trying to challenge himself with his courage and going into the woods and pretending to battle monsters and exploring the woods and swinging a stick around and having fun. And the idea I'm just arriving at is that deep down, maybe it's you have to kind of go into the dark place in the forest, you have to overcome your courage is not the absence of fear, but the overcoming of fear. And maybe it's harkening back to a childhood memory of wandering into the woods and exploring them. And that was his idea of when he discovered courage to an extent, and hope. I don't know what you think of the notion of maybe it's a bit of Miyamoto Shigeru's childhood kind of reflecting in his mythology.
I recall that he mentioned something about taking some inspiration from Prydain, and most notably the movie The Black Cauldron, about Terran's journey, where he travels a lot through forests.
I didn't know you said anything like that. Okay.
Because initially he chose Terran's colors from the movie for Link.
Well, except for the fact that Link was blonde.
Exactly.
But Elanwi was blonde in the movie.
Yes. And here it is. Terran's entire adventure is to try and figure out what courage is. And he's running away from this nefarious figure, the Horned King. And a lot of it is traveling through forests.
Yeah. Although the Black Cauldron came out about, I think, 2 years before the first Zelda game. Zelda would have already been in production by that time. So I question how much influence it had to an extent. The second game, I think, came out in 1989 or 1990, and the Link to the Past came out around, I think, 91 or 92.
That's about right.
But these games originally had about 2-3 years of production. So Black Cauldron came out in 85. By then, Miyamoto was in the midst of creating Zelda. So it was already happening. On the other hand, the mythology wasn't fleshed out till A Link to the Past. But the first game came out around the same time as Black Cauldron. So I'm just a little skeptical about it because the dates don't really match, I think. And you got to bear in mind, Black Cauldron would not have been translated for a while, and he would not have understood a lot of the story probably. Because Japanese don't always have the best English in the world. They're ranked 77, I think, according to the UN, in rankings of English literacy and capabilities.
That's fair.
And I don't know if Prydain was ever translated to Japanese or if it had a later translation. Now, he would have read Lord of the Rings by the 80s, but it took years for the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings to be translated. But they would have been at the top of the line at the head of the line for translation because they were bestsellers. Prydain sold really well. Lloyd Alexander was able to essentially retire on his book royalties, but it sold mostly in the Anglosphere. And books tend to take apparently 10 to 20 years before they're translated, if they're not the greatest books of all time. It takes like 10, 20 years Japanese or something. Conan, bear in mind, has only been translated recently in the past 2 years. And Conan is a major pillar of Northern American literature. So that took almost 100 years to translate. Let's just be careful when we say this. We definitely drew inspiration from, because you never know. Not to destroy your idea. It's highly possible. But I don't know what the dates on the translations were for Prydain.
That's fair.
But the thing is, Prydain was around since the 60s. And Lloyd Alexander did write them all really quickly, I think, so that by the 80s they were almost all published. And Prydain was a bestseller. Hey, let's be honest, it was. And there are similarities between Hyrule and Prydain, but I don't know how much there is in common. But Miyamoto Shigeru is a very well-read man. Who knows? Maybe he did know English and read the series. I don't know. Like, look at it this way: the creator of Earthbound is fluent in English and watched some pretty weird English movies, and drew inspiration from them for Earthbound. But the finished product and what he drew inspiration from have nothing in common, so that it's just utterly confusing how he arrived at what he arrived at. But my point is just that for Rory, her creative role and the fact that she's linked to the forest and the glens and the valleys and the vales and the wilderness and the animals of Hyrule suggests, I think, that's where I think Miyamoto Shigeru is drawing inspiration for the idea of courage and hope. That it's not from in some ways it seems like it's almost a Howardian thing. Like, it comes from the natural world. It comes from deep within us and our instincts and almost the animal side of people, where courage comes from. And you look at Zelda, the original games are very, very Freudian and very Jungian in a lot of ways, and very archetypal, the stories. And they're just the basic hero's journey. And
I know that another symbol of the wind represents is also freedom.
Yeah, that's very Gaelic in
It's
Celtic.
like, bring together courage and freedom is an interesting combination, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd argue also hope. Hope plays a large role with Link and whatnot. And because it's always when the hour is darkest that Link is reincarnated and appears to save the world of Hyrule. So that he's essentially hope itself. And so you have, freedom, because he's always... The thing with Link is Zelda's always wanting to entrap him into the role of knight, but there's a few comics where she tries to trap him with the role. I think the Ocarina of Time comic, but then Link rebels at the thought, just is utterly unhappy in the role. And so that reminds me of that scene with Long John Silver in Treasure Planet, where he says to put him in a cage would break his heart and break his spirit. And I think that's the idea of Link. Ferori is definitely the goddess of freedom. And it's in the natural world where you'll see the most freedom and the most courage and liberties of the world. And to an extent, to my mind, I don't know. I'm someone who loves spending time with the dog. I love running around in the woods. I love hiking. So to me, to confine someone away from being able to jump around in the snow, to wander in the woods or in the mountains, and to be denied that or to lose access to the sea and whatnot. Like, I do agree with the motif of the wind in your hair, and that's courage, that's freedom. It's in the natural world where you'll find freedom, and almost nowhere else. I know that's a weird philosophical notion. I don't know if maybe the chat's going to contradict me. It's fine if you do.
And I suppose, yes, I'm going to hearken to the cartoon, why Link has a major case of cabin fever.
Oh, yeah, I guess so, yeah.
He always was off adventuring to save all of Hyrule, and now he's essentially
on guard duty,
babysitting the
Triforce of Wisdom, and being babysat by Zelda. Let's be honest, in the cartoon, she's better than him. I really like Zelda in the cartoon. Like, I have a lot of complaints about the cartoon, but I really like Zelda. Excuse me. That cartoon had its charming moments, let's be honest. But that cartoon predates the mythology of Hyrule to a large extent. But it did play it pretty well with a lot of what later became established, I think. And I'm just looking at our notes. And the thing is, so Ferore, she created life and whatnot. But what's interesting is that, as well as that, you have, each of the goddesses fluttering about. You have in the Ocarina of Time creation myth flashback, which is a really, really cool part. And it has great cinematics there. But you have Din who flutters by in the Earth, in which you have asteroids, and you've got just these broken bits of rock, and you have nothing really. And she flies by, and it takes shape. Then she, I think, flies by, and you have the mountains that rise. I think canyon. You have Nairu that flies by, and you have, I think it's the seas that take shape, and you have just order spread throughout the world. And then Rory flies by. I think that's how it goes. And it's all green, and you have grass, and you have life. So they're flying by, but I think that's a nod to traveling in the freedom you were referencing earlier. So that you have there a reference to what Link's always doing. He's always traveling. And even Ganon's always traveling around trying to gather the sources and materials for his evil, wicked deeds. So I wonder if there's a reference there to travel as essentially, in this case, creating something. The goddesses are not exactly singing like in Celtic mythology, but they're wandering by and creating something. It's like in the CG, it's really hard to describe in words. They fly by, and like the whiplash, like the air they leave behind creates something, or so it looks like. That's how it looks like. Every scene, it looks like that, and it's a really, really neat effect. It's really cool. C'est super, c'est très chouette. That's chouette is how one of our old university professors would have described it. She was the only person I ever heard use the word chouette. It's an old French term, but like nobody uses it. It's basically the French term of splendid, and it's like, yeah, she just wanted to seem French as possible, but it was so funny. Anyways, these goddesses fly by, and the after effect of, or the whiplash of their flying by, creates something. It's a very interesting thing, so that you almost get a sense of all of them being part of the air or the wind. You know, I find it a nod to Link traveling around and whatnot, and leaving marks and echoes of his presence behind him as he's wandering by. It's a really interesting effect, and there's a lot implied there, I think. And if you look at old Celtic stories and how often it was minstrels traveling around, or you had figures just traveling around causing trouble or mayhem, or getting involved in local events, that colors a lot of Celtic myths. And we're Incognita who interrupted, and I really like this. It's been so long since I've played any of the games. There's so much I don't remember. Yeah, same. We ended up just having to read the Zelda Encyclopedia that I think I got a few years ago. It's a really fascinating read. It's got a lot of beautiful art. And they split Zelda into 3 timelines, which is just mind-boggling to me. I find it really neat and cool. I really like that. But it's just, wow. The fact that they've made so many Zelda games, they had to split it into 3 timelines because they couldn't get it fit in one single linear timeline. It is so funny. It is so very funny. I don't say that to deride the Zelda universe, never. I just say it as, wow. You've kind of backed yourself into a little bit of a corner when you have to do that. But the way they do it, I just find the argument for the 3 timelines, like how they did it, like you've got Ocarina of Time that creates the 3 different timelines. That's just such a fascinating idea. It was a stroke of genius in a way. I'd argue it was almost lightning in a bottle. Lightning in a bottle, except this is water. But yeah, this is full of Nairu, by the way. And Zoras. Yes, I'm kind of cannibalistic that way. But and let's not get into how Miyamoto Shigeru also folded a lot of evolution, because the Zoras in each of the 3 timelines evolve into different kinds of creatures. So you have evolution that also plays a factor. But I wonder if maybe evolution also is influenced to an extent by the various goddesses through the Triforce. Like if the Triforce of Power is predominant in one timeline, one of the races start to take more the shape according to negative influence of that one. Or let's say Triforce of Courage is more predominant. They start to take the negative shapes of that and whatnot, where the negatives of the three different goddesses maybe influence, or maybe the positives also do. I don't know. But it's interesting that the Hylians are the only ones immune to this and whatnot. But the Hylian people, the people of the actual kingdom of Hyrule, are very special. They're very remarkable. You consider the lands outside of Hyrule, and well, okay, I'll say Hylians, but I'm also going to say the desert folk. What's their names?
The Gerudo?
The Gerudo. The Gerudos and the Hylians seem like the most special people. Every other race doesn't seem as unique as these two. And I just mentioned the Gerudo because they've been able to keep up with the Hylians in a few accomplishments and whatnot, physical and otherwise. So that I wonder if we're kind of looking at something of a bit of a nod to Tolkien with the early elves. And I wonder if maybe one day the Hylians and Gerudo will decline like the elves of Tolkien's universe eventually did. But that said, the Hylians were they received the best gift of all in the form of essentially a promised land. But the goddesses apparently created the whole world and came to a stop. I think they began and stopped with Hyrule. So they kind of made a rotation of the earth or something. That'd be my theory. And they arrived in Hyrule. And once there, they apparently blessed the land upon which the Temple of Time would be built upon. I do know that that area is blessed. And they apparently then created one thing and imbued it with some of their own essence. The Triforce, the three triangles, so that you have one triangle, then another, and they're all attached to each other. But then they're broken up in Ocarina of Time into three pieces. But you have this triangle that is sacred, and of course, gold is an eternal color, and also a color of great love. And it's said to come from it does come from deep within the earth, but here it's shining down from the heavens. But you have all three goddesses that have different kinds of connections with the earth. But it's at this point that Din, Nairu, and Ferrari assume a role more like Eru Iluvatar, avec the three goddesses leaving the triangle, or the triangles, I should say, plural, behind as a symbol of their bond with the people of Hyrule, the world, and the kingdom, respectively. Whereupon they then depart, and they're shown flying back into the heavens, essentially departing for the spiritual realm where they reside. And they're never seen again in the entire literature of Zelda. They're never really mentioned for the most part. And even in the encyclopedia, it states it's a mystery. So the people of Hyrule whom are recording this myth and the stories of Link and whatnot across the ages honestly have no idea what happened to these three goddesses. Maybe they were destroyed, but it's unlikely that they were, because I'm just throwing an idea, but the thing is Triforce still has power. On the other hand, maybe they just lost interest and went over to another planet or something. Or maybe they're watching over everything. We don't know. Like they're a complete and total mystery.
I mean, we also know that the Redead couldn't even go close to the Temple of Time.
Oh, yeah, the undead. Yeah. With the zombies and whatnot. Yeah, they couldn't even go near it. And that just speaks to how holy it is. As to the Temple of Time, I'm not sure whether its construction is ever, like, I don't know if it's ever stated when it was built. So that's it's got its own mystery, I think. I can't remember. I'm probably wrong. I'll have to do more research. Zelda's a universe I don't remember too much about. Like, terra incognita here, but the very fact that they leave a physical bond between them and the world, you have shades of the Japanese katana of Amaterasu being passed to the Japanese imperial family, along with her mirror, the Ark of the Covenant from Jewish myths and stories, and other items of religious importance to different religions and mythologies. This idea of a physical object being passed down is very common. That said, the Triforce of Power, though, in time, a lot of people began to crave it and wanted to abuse its power of its wish granting power, because it's like a genie or a jinn, it grants wishes. But the trouble is, people began to abuse it and hunger for it. And so it became rather like the Silmarils. And so it got hidden in the spiritual realm. And once there, the spiritual realm was essentially locked up, with the key being woven into the shape of an ocarina called the Ocarina of Time, which was passed down into the royal family of Hyrule. Although the royal family, I think that royal family is really old, because Skyward Sword, I'm not familiar with all the mythology from Skyward Sword. Don't get me wrong. I haven't played the game. I'm not entirely familiar with it. But originally they were residing in the skies. And the thing about Skyward Sword, Zelda, the royal family are descended from the goddess Hylia, but Hylia takes on the shape of of a Hylian woman named Zelda, of course. And I think it's from her that the line is descended. I think that's how it works. But the goddesses didn't just leave the triangles behind and say, well, good job, well done, let's go home. And they left the thing unguarded. No. They did leave it guarded. They wanted to believe in the good in all mortals. That didn't fully work out. But they did leave a guard dog behind. Well, not a guard dog. I guess you could say a guard goddess. And a goddess they all seem to have created. I'm going to hypothesize that they created her together. But she seems to have more connections to Nehru, I think. Because, Lake Hylia and whatnot. But because Hylia seems to be more of a goddess of wisdom as well. A lesser goddess of wisdom than Nehru. But they left the goddess Hylia behind. Now, they also left a lot of spirits and fairies behind to also guard the moral realm and potentially guide any hero like Link who needs to go save the world. For those who like the Zelda D20 system, it's a great system, and it does offer up the chance to be guided by fairies and spirits and whatnot. But the idea is that Hylia had the larger command over the situation, and it is the goddess Hylia who was tasked with protecting the Triforce. In this regard, I guess you could say she kind of failed, but given that I think she's the one who created the ocarina, I can't remember. But this is mostly an examination of the creation of Hyrule, not the ocarina. We'll have to do a podcast video on that at some point. But the ocarina is extremely important and has connections to Hylia and the royal family. Hylia herself is the ancestress of the royal family. And the royal family had for duty, the main duty of guarding the Temple of Time and the Triforce, and not to abuse its power, which, let's give it up for the royal family. They never did. Although I would suspect that there were members of the family who wanted to abuse the power of the Triforce. But kudos to some members of the royal family. It was always the ones who said no who ultimately triumphed. Probably with the assistance of a lot of the common folk who took more of their side. I'm just saying the average man is probably, and women are probably have more sense than medieval aristocracy sometimes did. But not always. Sometimes the aristocracy was very wise. But because let's not deal in extremes here or definitives. But at least in terms of people. But the thing is, you've got you've got Hylia's descendants who guarded almost jealously the Triforce. Now, a lot of those who tried to take its power for themselves, I think, became the Shadow people from, or the Twilight people from Twilight Princess, and they were cast out into Twilight Realm, the Twilight Zone. Actually, let's call it that. but that'll be a separate podcast, and we're gonna have to probably get, like, we're kind of getting a little ahead of our Theogony of Hyrule podcast, which we began a while back, and we'll have to script and continue. The next, given that it takes about a month and a half to make those episodes because of research and also all the art, and we also take actual gameplay footage, and we have to look through everything. The next part of that would probably be, like, I think the Skyward Sword events to an extent. And so that would take a while. That'll take a while to script and whatnot. In between that and all the content we have to make for this coming month, it's probably going to be not till February, till we get that Theogony thing. Sorry to those who voted for Theogony. It just takes a long time to put it together. The last video took us like 2 months to put together. It was fun. I loved it. So we are going to do that. So in the meantime, we might make one other, this kind of Zelda piece of content, because we gotta give you guys and gals something. But anyways, by the time of the events of Skyward Sword, from what it looks like in the encyclopedia, it mentions that a lot of demons surged up from beneath the earth. So they came from below the earth. And this is something that has a lot of connotations with traditional mythology. Because if you look at the myths of Norse mythology, Muspelheim and Niflheimer are both beneath the earth, so to speak. Sort of. It's not like the earth is round. It's more like it's hung in a tree and branch, and near the roots are where are Niflheim and Muspelheim, and the tree of Yggdrasil grew kind of between them, I guess you could say. And it's big. It's the world tree. But the idea I'm kind of getting at is that demons arose from Niflheimer and Muspelheimer, respectively, but also from Ymir, or Orgelmir, as the demons call him. And he, from his remains, Midgardr was created, and you get the world of the Norsemen. But the idea of from beneath the earth comes demons, there's Norse mythology that deals with that. Greek mythology dealt with it, with the Gigantes and the demons and Typhon, that's it, and Gaia and the Titans and whatnot. You have, in Japanese Shinto beliefs, Izanami, who creates a lot of destruction, and because she's got a rivalry with her ex-husband, because all divorces end badly. Of course they have to. Mythology and fantasy.
Yeah.
But can you imagine the child custody battle between those two?
That might explain the chaos between three siblings.
Yeah, and why Tsukuyomi and Susanoo are so messed up. But you also have Christianity, of course, which has the whole devils coming from and demons coming from below the earth, angels and God coming from above and whatnot. Basically, Skyfather versus whatever's lying down deep in the bowels of the earth. Sadly, in modern storytelling, Hades often gets the short end of the stick, whereas in Greek mythology, Hades was more the guard dog against the demons of Tartarus and whatnot. He was the guy just making sure they didn't break through. So, very important. But in Hyrule's history, Demise is the ultimate demon, and Demise and his demons came from below, I think it said, and from beneath the earth and corrupted, so that Hylia, with the Hylians taking to the skies and Hylia kind of trying to fight them off, you kind of have this sky mother, sky mother, we'll go with that, versus demonic force, who actually is drawn kind of like a demon from medieval paintings. Kudos to Nintendo for that. But you've got these two forces fighting with each other until Demise is ultimately banished. Hylia, through Zelda, kind of, cleans up the place alongside Link. And then Demise casts his curse, which I would argue is an act of curse and oath. But we'll get into the power of oaths and curses in Zelda at a later date. As I keep saying, this is just about the creation myth of Hyrule. So that, just to briefly touch upon, and if there's any Zelda fans who come into the chat or after this is done and come into the comment section and want to correct me, go right ahead. I'm more familiar with Tolkien, Howard, and Dragonlance at this point. Well, Howard a little less than Dragonlance and Lord of the Rings. And there's always someone who knows more than you. That's undeniable. But the thing with Demise is he casts a curse, and thus we get the cycle of the trio. Kind of in effect from that point on. You have Link as the representative of Hyrule. You have Zelda as the representative of Nehru, but also Hylia. And you have Ganon, the reincarnation of Demise, and as kind of shadow representative of Din, so that the three are interlocked into an eternal battle between each other. And it might seem weird, but I kind of see Sia as a character that should usher in kind of the end for Demise's curse in a way. Because the curse, the trouble is you have two positive representatives of Nehru and Hyrule and a negative representative of Din. So maybe balance could only be restored once the negative force is removed from having possession of the Triforce of Power and replaced with a positive wielder of the Triforce of Power. Someone who will look at the power and use it responsibly, and thus a redeemed and hallowed, I think that's the term, hallowed Sia would better balance, but this would probably put her into the cycle with Link and Zelda in a way, which, given that she's the guardian of time, and that time is an important theme in Zelda. In Zelda, time seems to be cyclical. Like history continuously is in a repeat, with the three in a trapped in a hero struggle, a hero villain struggle and whatnot. So I'm not saying that Sia would become a villain in that case. No, she'd probably remain a heroine, but it's just you'd have other threats. Never mind, there's Vati, there's Aghanim, there's other demons and monsters that appear throughout the Zelda series. So if ever they wanted to discard Ganon as a villain, they can easily create new ones or other ones, or bring in demons from other lands and whatnot. But you'd have three main characters really that would restore a bit of a balance to Hyrule in a way. But there are ways of disturbing the balance without, relying on the Triforce all the time. But that said, this struggle between the three is kind of the defining attribute, I guess you could say, of Legends of Zelda. So I'd kind of argue Hyrule Warriors seems to come at the end of one of the timelines, given that Sia takes Ganon's place by taking the Triforce of Power away from him, and he's ultimately destroyed at the end, so that he's replaced with Sia. And so you have Link, Sia, and Zelda.
And so you have...
But I also wonder if maybe, real quick, I wonder if maybe Zelda's disturbing the balance to an extent. Because she's technically a reincarnated goddess. Isn't she breaking the balance just as much as Ganon to an extent?
And if we look at the fact that we're aware that the Hylian royal family is descended from
Hylia,
similar as the myth with the mythical emperors of Japan, descended from Amaterasu.
Yeah.
So that power that naturally flows through, particularly the woman of the royal family.
Yeah, because the kings are basically just worthless, typically in the stories.
The fact that might cause some issues with Zelda.
I wonder if at some point it might be natural for Nintendo to take out Zelda from the triangle, so to speak. Because having her around with her overwhelming force and power is kind of disturbing the balance as well. Because if, let's say, you put in Sia's this half goddess. She's a half goddess. Zelda is much more goddess than Sia. And so if you remove her and Sia embraces her mortality, kind of like what Elrond does, for example, you would effectively have two semi-elvish characters and a goddess. But if Zelda forfeits her place in the trio, so to speak, to someone else, I don't know. I'm just extrapolating and suggesting and theorizing here. I'm not saying this has to happen. No. I'm not saying let's get rid of Zelda as a character. Gosh, no. I'm just saying, like, I'm just theorizing and going into metaphysics and whatnot.
This might
like in theoretics. But maybe if Zelda was removed along with Ganon and replaced with Sia and someone else, maybe Lana. But Lana is basically an extension of Sia, so that couldn't work either. Maybe someone like maybe the knight from the comic, the one male knight. I forget his name. You really liked him.
Yeah.
Like someone like him or something. Although he seemed impulsive more than anything else. But if you learn wisdom, maybe you'd have a better balance between the three. Because I can't help but think that maybe this is about balance to an extent.
And maybe that is also why a lot of people try and kidnap Zelda and try to take her.
Mm-hmm.
Because the entire descent from Hylia
and the Triforce of Wisdom.
And the Triforce of Wisdom, which makes Zelda very powerful. Imagine taking her and draining that power away from you within yourself.
Well, now you're happening upon what Ganon wants to do. But in some depictions, Ganon wants to marry her. Like at the cartoon.
But if he draws her power, that essentially means he draws the power of a goddess.
Yeah.
And that would...
But we can't forget also the conquest and the Freudian connotations to an extent. I'll just touch on that. There is a certain amount of male drive, so to speak, and female drive, and where Ganon and Link are struggling kind of over who gets to get with Zelda. That's kind of one of the ideas to an extent. I'm not saying that's all there is. I'm just saying to an extent. But there is kind of that motive in some depictions I've seen with Ganon. You know what I mean? He wants to kind of marry Zelda to an extent. I'm just saying marry, like you all know what I mean. But in turn, Link is trying to protect her. It's a very classic thing of dark male versus good male sort of thing. And this goes back to old mythology and whatnot, and psychology. So you do have that kind of conflict. On the other hand, there is one part of the creation myth we have not gotten into, as there is one figure who was introduced recently in Hyrule Warriors, whom we did mention just now, but who is involved early in Hyrule's history. Sia. Now, when the goddesses left Hyrule, they entrusted everything for the most part to Hylia, because you got to leave someone behind to watch things, and to all the fairies and spirits and whatnot. But these spirits and this goddess, now I would argue this goddess, when she did to Hyrule, kind of had to do like the Valar. She started off as probably like an Ainur, and then she now becomes an active force within the world of Hyrule, so that she's influenced by Hyrule because she's interacting directly with it. But on the other hand, that puts some limitations on what she can and cannot do and on her power. And ultimately, the great power in the world, I guess you could say, is time. Time conquers all to an extent. And in Hylia's case, it also conquers her to an extent. And my point is, the goddesses seem to have appointed Hylia to watch over Hyrule, and in each of the timelines that split, Hylia is subject to this. Like, there are 3 Hylias, one in each of the 3 timelines, I think it is. And you have all the spirits and fairies and fairy queens, because there's also those weird looking, well, I shouldn't say, those unclothed fairy queens. I'm trying to keep it PG and I don't want to do a no-no here on YouTube.
The great fairies.
Yeah, the great fairies. All of these spirits are influenced by time itself. They're aware of the passage of time. They're ageless, but the three timelines, the split in time, they don't seem entirely aware of it to an extent. To an extent, yes, Zelda uses the Ocarina of Time and sends Link back, I think, 6-7 years. And, he has to live out his life. But then after that, the later Zeldas are not aware of this split timeline. So I'm just arriving at the fact that what's fascinating is that the three golden goddesses saw it coming. So I wonder, like Eru Iluvatar, they had a plan. Like the music of the Ainur, it's like, oh, well, Demise wove chaos into it. Yes, but it's of the essence of the goddesses. So can he really fight against their desires? Because he's subject to this split in timeline as well. But the three golden goddesses appointed a guardian to supervise the flow of time and make sure it was running smoothly. And that guardian was Chia, a very powerful half goddess of sorts, or demigoddess. She's not a full goddess. Now, in the realm she operates in, I think it's the spirit realm, or the realm of time, I think it's also been called, but in Hyrule Warriors. But she operates in a separate realm, in a separate corner of the spirit realm, and observes the passage of time, but is not supposed to influence unless in the most dire of circumstances. And she is observing everything, and she's got for a job to make sure it's running smoothly. But the thing is, the job didn't exactly go running smoothly because you have a split in the timeline. But she didn't lose her position there. But in Hyrule Warriors, she jumps from one timeline to the next without any problems. So that she seems to be a uniting factor across timelines. That's an interesting thing. And so my point, and the fact that when she steps out of the spirit realm, she starts to age in the same way that Hylians do. She's now of the fabric of the realm of Hyrule. But when she steps back into her realm, she seems apart from it. So, but it might be a weird argument, but maybe to an extent, this might sound weird, but when she gets the Triforce of Power, she is now of the world. Now, I know at the end she kind of returns, but I would kind of question how long she can remain apart from the world. Lana might become the new Guardian of Time and apart. But Sia, like, you can't remove the Triforce of Power from the world, because then you only have the Triforce of Courage and Wisdom. And you need all three to keep the world together, because it's part of the world. It helps keep it together. And the world sustains the Triforce in turn, as do the goddesses. But if you remove one, don't you remove the Din factor from the universe? Wouldn't it fall apart? So that I'm kind of questioning the ending there and the wisdom behind that ending in Hyrule Warriors. But I know, but going back, apparently there was a split between Lana and Sia, because at some point the shadows across who knows how much time immemorial and whatnot, time uncounted, the shadows of Demise and other demons and whatnot starts to infect Sia. But Sia also falls because she's above them. They can't really touch her to an extent. I would argue she falls more due to her own problem. Because she is mortal, she is subject to mortality, to mortals' emotions, and to a certain element of mortality. The weird thing is, she seems to crave mortality in this way that she wants to be Hylian or something, but she falls in love with Link because she has human emotions, or Hylian emotions. She is ultimately victim to this great flaw and strength that we all have. She develops emotions. She falls in love. She becomes overwhelmed by passion in a way that Feanor is. So she becomes obsessed with Link and becomes corrupted and seeks to take the Triforce of Power. Ultimately, she's destroyed, but because Lana's only half a person, because Lana's the good, Tia's the, you know, because is kind of supposed to be the wickedness, but Tia's the original. So, you know, you have a split in two. But then at the end, when you revive Tia, Tia's bound to the Triforce of Power, and there's the wish that Lana and Tia be separate people. So that this wish, I think, takes effect, and they are now separate people. So that Lana becomes, I would argue, the new Guardian of Time, and Tia becoming the new bearer of the Triforce of Power would make much more sense, because you cannot afford to take. You can't separate the three Triforce triangles. They either all have to go to the spirit realm, or you gotta keep all three in the mortal realm. But if Tia stays in the mortal realm, doesn't that mean she might perish once more and age and pass, just as Link and Zelda do? But if she has a Triforce of Power, doesn't that mean that she'll reincarnate in the future with the same abilities and the same probably tendencies to an extent to fall in love with Link, and just like Zelda does? And whatnot. Wow, future Links are gonna have major marital problems between, or having to choose between Zelda and Tia. But I hope you guys don't mind us kind of theorizing about the future of Hyrule and Zelda to an extent, because it is a very fascinating world. And the thing is, because Hyrule Warriors, I know some people don't want to regard it as canon, but I like the idea of the Guardian of Time, so that there are layers to creation. There's layers, because when the goddesses created, you know, the Earth or Hyrule, they created everything. They created a spiritual realm, but they also created time itself. And then they basically took one of the first mortals, or half goddesses, and said, you're in charge of supervising time itself. Which also has me wondering, who's Tia's mother or something? Like, you know, if she's half mortal, was she, you know what I mean? Like, was she created by Din? Was she, you know, kind of just popped into existence like Hylia or something? Or something? Or was she given birth to the natural way and whatnot? I'm just a little confused about that. It's not a, hey, I don't mind Nintendo's saying, hey, we're not going to get into that. We're going to leave it a mystery. Mysteries can be fun. But on the other hand, a part of me just wants to know. I need to know, as the Tarzan song goes.
That's a very major question.
Yeah, because they created a major goddess in Hylia. She's essentially the head of the pantheon, because heaven knows Din, Ferrari, and Nairu are not going to get involved. So Hylia is basically the queen of the gods, and apparently, I think, a semi-sky and sea goddess. And you've got all these minor deities and half gods. You've got a lot of hats in Zelda. A lot. But it seems Tia predates all those half gods and whatnot. I might argue that maybe she dates back to the Hylia period, but it doesn't seem like many of the fairies and spirits know about her. But in Hyrule Warriors, it doesn't seem like Zelda's terribly surprised to discover Tia to an extent. Maybe through the Triforce of Wisdom, the knowledge of Tia is passed down, and the goddess Hylia knows about Tia. So there are gods who know about Tia, and obviously Ganon and / Demise knows about her. So Tia's really ancient, but she doesn't look her age. Let's give her that much, because otherwise she'll get very, very mad in universe. But there's something there, like I think in the lore, about her predating a lot of spirits and fairies, I think.
And if we look at Ocarina of Time, there's only one person that commented he had memories close to that time, and that was the Great Deku Tree.
Well, he's ancient, yeah, but it doesn't seem like he knows about her. So that the flow of time, like the creation of time itself, seems to have been apart from him and predate him, I think.
And that is very impressive.
Well, he's really ancient. He knows about the creation of the world, but I think it was told to him, wasn't it? So, but here's my question. Do the great fairies come before him or after him? I'm not sure about that one.
because I think, if I recall correctly, I think he mentioned that he has conversed with some deities.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's implied he's talked with some who've wandered by, but
And why many consider that his death in Ocarina of Time, why people,
it's a tragedy.
it's a tragedy.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of figures that predate him that have never met him. But I think that sorry if I'm looking off in the distance, it's just I tend to think and I stare at the wall or whatever. It's the goddess Hylia, though. I'm pretty sure predates the Great Deku Tree, and by the time he was born, I would argue the world was already ancient to an extent. Hyrule was already ancient. That'd be my hypothesis. I don't know if he's around in the Skyward Sword. I need to do more research. And I think that I'd be very curious to know when he came into being. But he is obviously someone who was created by through Furore's grace, so to speak, because he's part of the flora and fauna of the world. And well, our good friend Epic Kingdom, another Tolkien channel, has popped up. Good afternoon. He's expressed interest in Tolkien's Legendarium. Not Tolkien's Legendarium, Zelda's Legendarium. And he probably knows more about Zelda than we do. And he's got an excellent channel about the books and book collecting when it comes to Tolkien. Seriously, check him out. Subscribe to him now that we've plugged him. Hope you're well, my friend, and having a great New Year's Eve. We were just getting into the elements of the difference between creating the physical world, the spiritual world, and the flow of time. Because you have the goddess Hylia that was created and given the job of supervising the world. I'm glad you're doing well, my friend. And Hylia was given the job of, just to recap for our friend here, was given the job of supervising creation after Din, Nehru, and Furore saw to the creation of the world. And then they ended up ascribing to the Guardian of Time, Sia, in a realm apart from Hyrule, the world, the job of supervising the flow of time and making sure it's working, which doesn't exactly fully happen because, you have a break in 3 in the timeline. But we were just wondering if maybe that was part of the plan, because the goddesses did not seem to have punished Sia. You know what? I would argue that was a major failure in your job. And yet, it's like, okay, business as usual. I wonder if that was part of the plan. Yeah, the timeline was always supposed to crack in 3. Or maybe it was not part of the plan, but it was taken in good grace, and Sia's kind of directing and supervising all 3 timelines. But most beings and creatures don't seem aware of Sia. And she seems aware of all 3 different timelines. But I also wonder if maybe at some point Nintendo's just going to make a 4th timeline just to mess around with all of us. And so we'll have another timeline well, actually, maybe another timeline would be a good idea, now that I think about it, because the 3 other timelines are getting clogged.
Yeah.
And they're starting to run out of space. Maybe a 4th timeline will allow them to explore and retell old stories and new stories, and kind of explore the different civilizations within the world of Hyrule a little more. And who knows, it might be a good idea, and they could get a lot more mileage out of The Legend of Zelda. That said, it would mean Sia would have had more work because she's supervising 4 timelines. Hopefully a 4th or 5th timeline will see the return of Linkle as a character. I really liked her.
Yeah.
But the creation of the world seems to have been a multi-layered project between the goddesses. So
one thing that I can't help but think of the creation of the world and Ocarina of Time is how they say I think they have stories of how the Gorons were born of the fires of Din, the Zoras.
they have water connection, and
and the Kokiri were born from
the forest.
the forest.
Yeah.
Why? Here it is. The Kokiri, like the Fae, some of them may have been born from
The Great Deku Tree and from the goddesses. Well, the goddess Ferrari. Yeah. Like there is a connection between these three races,
and
but
why,
Hylians have a connection to all three. It seems.
yeah, and there's probably a reason why the three I call them gems that Link had to gather to open the Temple of Time.
Yeah.
Why they were essentially guarded by
each of the three races. Yeah. The Gerudo, I've often seen people associate them with Din. Yeah. But I kind of always associated them, given that you have a lot of horsemanship exercises and mini games, and the Gerudo are obsessed with their freedom apart from from Ganon in a few depictions and from the Kingdom of Hyrule. So that I kind of associate that with Ferrari. And they do have their own wisdom and oases, so that the oases and the wisdom they have all to their own as that. So that's why I kind of put Gerudos with the Hylians. And you got to bear in mind, the Gerudos are all women. So they need to actually, and it's stated, they do need to lure over Hylian men to marry and have little mini Gerudos. But not every child born from such marriages would be Gerudos, I think.
I know that I was thinking the Gorons.
I know. But I'm saying, yeah, the Gorons.
The Gerudo.
Yeah, the Gerudos are also often associated with Din, was my point.
Right.
That's what I said. Yeah.
The entire negative side because of their association with Ganondorf.
Yeah. But then in later games like Breath of the Wild, I really like this about Breath of the Wild. They kind of redeemed the Gerudos and have them basically be almost pretty much the equals of the Hylians in terms of the balance.
They want to break free from...
Well, they have, but I was just arguing that they were never really a negative force. They were just another force, and they're perfectly in balance. But they're also often imbalanced, just as the Hylians often are. Yeah, so yeah, you've got these two different races, but you have the Kokiri, you have the Zora, you have the Gorons, and you have, of course, the Twilight people who... I wonder if the Twilight folk are supposed to be shadow versions of kind of Ferrari. Like, because, you have the whole turning into animal thing in Twilight Princess. I wonder if it's supposed to have connotations with Ferrari there, like a shadow people there. Because they had the courage to try to grab a hold of the tried to pervert it to an extent. So I wonder if we're supposed to look at it that way. And the Zoras are villains in some depictions, so they're sometimes also the shadow of wisdom to an extent. But you do have the three elements, which are also fire, water, wind. But also Ferrari, let's never forget, she does have associations and connotations with earth and the forest, just as Din has connotations with the earth. And but I do also wonder to an extent, because Hylia was given a job as, but she's got connotations with the sky, the sea, and you often hear about Lake Hylia. Tia got the job and has connotations and connections with Din. I wonder if at some point we're going to have a guardianer of some sort who will have a connection to Ferrari more than any other goddess. Tia seems more connected to Din. Hylia seems more connected to Nehru. And I wonder if we're going to get one who's more connected to Ferrari.
I'd like to see a bit more of that, to expand on Ferrari. Because...
even if it would be a really neat idea.
Because a part of me wants to elaborate a bit on Ferrari and her power.
Yeah. She's a bit more indirect, I think, to an extent. Because we've seen the... but like, she is direct, but in terms of magical, she's and incantations, she's less direct than Nehru and Din. But maybe theoretically, we should regard Link's usage of the Triforce of Courage. Like, we got to bear in mind, there is some inspiration taken from Lord of the Rings with the 3 gems, because you have the 3 rings: the ring of fire, the ring of air, and the ring of water. But you also have the 3 Silmarils that end up in the air, the water, and in flames or lava. And you have here the same kind of elemental construction to the world, but also to the 3 different Triforce items and jewels. So, with that in mind, although Gandalf had more connections to fire, I wonder if maybe, given that Ferrari is often associated with hope, with freedom, with courage, if maybe Link's job and his Triforce of Courage is not simply just, and Ferrari herself are not just working through just like swinging a sword and bashing, or as Victor and Sukoden 2 would say, thumping a demon over the head. But maybe Link is there with the Triforce of Courage and as the kind of avatar of Ferrari and the hero of time, because you have the hero of time, you have the guardian of time. Time seems to be an important theme. We'll have to do a video on just the connections of time and of a lot of the themes and ideas there. But I wonder if maybe Link is there to inspire hope in others so that they'll save themselves. If maybe he's kind of working like Gandalf, the spirit of hope, and where the Triforce of Courage isn't about Link having courage. He's already got that. He doesn't need it. But and it's not exactly a buckler against the magic of Ganon and the wickedness, but maybe it's more he's inspiring courage and good wherever he goes in others. And if maybe the Link's ability to connect with the people of Hyrule and him running around doing these little quests and whatnot is him reigniting hope in them so that they'll get up, pick up their pitchfork and fight and defend themselves from Ganon and his dark, nefarious influence. And we have Stephanie, Frederick, taking off. Already miss you. But I don't know what you think of that, where Link is working like Gandalf, as is Ferrari, where it's indirect. Because bear in mind, he ended up kind of doing an exorcism in Majora's Mask to save the Skull Kid from the Majora's Mask, which is probably, I would argue, the closest we come to a truly more evil and powerful demonic force than even Ganon, it seems. I would argue, to an extent, if that was like dealing with a Morgoth or an Ungoliant to an extent. Majora, I mean. But Link there is saving Skull Kid, but just as he also takes some time in Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, saving different villages in Ocarina of Time, are not all motivated to do the right thing all the time. Like the one Princess of the Zora, she's not always, like, let's be honest, she's selfish. And Darunia does not have the brains to realize when Hyrule's in danger. But even then, he only cares enough about the Gorons to a large extent. So Link's there to inspire hope in them so that they'll actually fight for their people and use their sagely abilities and magics to do the right thing. So I wonder if it's more influence and indirect, and that's the real magic of the Triforce of Courage. Because we got to bear in mind, Din created the earth, matter. Nehru created order, but the living creatures were created by Ferrari. So she is working her magic through people, I guess you'd say, and through Link that way. And Link is using his Triforce of Courage through people. Like, it's like kind of like the people of Hyrule are the Triforce of Courage in a way. Like, he's working it through them, and thus he is, gaining. He's not gaining in power, but he's, inspiring in them to do the right thing, and in turn, they embolden the Triforce of Courage's abilities a little further. And so, like, it's a bit of a symbiotic thing, I guess. Maybe he is getting a bit more power from them as well. So I'm just theorizing there. And so maybe the Triforce of Courage could also be argued to be a bit of the Triforce of Faith in a way. Triforce of Faith, Hope, Freedom, Courage, and Virtue. Because courage itself is derived from the word valiant, and valor had connotations with piety as well. And so and with honor and whatnot. So you've got, and with freedom to an extent, at least at its roots in Latin and other languages. So I'm just saying that you've got these three different, courage is not just Link going, oh, I'm brave today. He's working magic in a way.
Like, it connects everyone.
Yeah.
And if we go with what you explained with faith and piety, the Triforce of Courage might be what connects the higher planes, like...
well, they all connect the higher planes to the mortal realm, from the upper world and the lower world. But the Triforce of Courage is just connecting the people together, I would argue. Triforce of Wisdom also kind of connects people, as does power. But, like, okay, if we look at it as the Triforce of Power is what creates, let's say, your flesh. The Triforce of Wisdom is maybe what what maybe creates your spirit, or maybe maybe creates your what you need to live, like your body's organs, gets them working. The Triforce of Courage is maybe the spirit, the soul, or whatnot. And I've got a lot of questions about the Fea and Roa of Hyrule. I don't know how that's going to work, because the Roa would probably be more created through Din, but the Fea would probably be more through Furore. But where does Neru fit into that? She's the knowledge, the wisdom. She's the brain. So maybe it's Furore creates the heart, Neru creates the brain, and the rest of the body and the blood is created from Din. So, because I have seen some fans say the Hyrule should just reject Din, which strikes me as a grave mistake and a great peril. And you know what? Power in and of itself does corrupt absolutely. But on the other hand, there's something from Yu Yu Hakusho, and even from, I think, Dostoevsky and Joseph Conrad, who explain a parent has power over their child. That is power in a way. I'm not saying relationships are based in power. I don't subscribe to that belief. But you do have the ability to mold this young life into shape and mold their perception, their views, them. And Din is molding the world and the people physically and whatnot. So to cast her out would be to undo Hyrule.
And if we consider the entire matter of, since the Gorons worship more Din with Death Mountain and the lava.
And we also have to bear in mind, I think Din's the goddess of smithery.
Exactly. You have lava, when it cools and becomes soil, it's some of the most fertile soil in the world.
Yep. So the three goddesses interact with each other that way, yeah. But with smithing, I'd argue it would probably be a process of mixing Neru and Din in a way, because you need water to cool the metal, and you need lava and fire to heat the metal. But the other thing, now that I think about it, is if you look at the ranks of society in Hyrule, Neru is the one associated with the royal family the most, because Hylia and whatnot. Hylia and Neru have connotations with the royal family. Din, you have mining, you have you have forging, smithery, like craftsmanship. These are arts passed down by Din. You have hunting, you have just generally probably farming and
mercantilism.
travel. Yeah, that's Furore. So this might sound weird, but to an extent, I wonder, like, how might the people of Hyrule regard the three goddesses? Din and Furore would probably be more worshipped by the common folk. Nehru probably by the clergy and the clerical class, and what in the mages, or as they're called, interesting term. And yet, maybe the common folk would be divorced from Nehru in a way. Yeah, they'd probably still worship her, but maybe they would kind of regard her as she's not our goddess. Like Din and Furore, they're ours, but Nehru belongs to the royal family and the aristocracy and the clergy.
And maybe those closer to the sea.
Yeah. So right there, that just put a pin in that idea to an extent. Like those from the sea and who are fishermen and whatnot would have more connections to Nehru. But even then, wouldn't they have connections more to Hylia?
That's a fair question. And since we're dealing with wilderness, a lot of them would be farmers and merchants.
Well,
we're dealing with Furore.
But and you'll got to bear in mind, most of the population will be fishermen and farmers and whatnot, because you have essentially an agrarian feudal system and structure to your society. And I'm just saying that most of the deities they'd come into contact would be the lesser deities in terms of who they'd worship, but they might worship like Hylia, of course, obviously, but the common man might have more, or the common woman might have more contact with Din and Furore, this worshippers, than Nehru.
That makes sense.
But I wonder what that means. Would they resent the Nehru worshippers? Would they just see them as they're apart from us?
I think Darunia may have made a comment about that, how the Gorons associate more with Din. And he's aware of
he doesn't make any such comments.
He
that requires brain to have any. And I'm very scornful of Darunia, but he never makes comments about things. He only makes comments about the fire and the mountain. That's all he talks about, and and dancing. But it's the other Gorons who make reference to how they're smiths and miners and whatnot. But the Kokiri do not extend connection to Furore. They extend their connection to the Great Deku Tree. It's the Zora really who comment on how they are connected to Nehru. So now, when I said people, the common man, I'm not referring to the Zora, Hylians and Gerudos. But the common Zora would probably be would associate themselves more closely with Nehru. And that's because Nehru's their progenitor. Well, the progenitor of the gods that created them. We have once again the sea people associating with Nehru. So maybe might be Zoran merchants, and that might be their connection on the common man level with Nehru. So maybe they won't resent or anything. I'm just
maybe the farther away you get from the capital, discounting the sea, you might have more worship of Furore and Din.
Yeah. But on the other hand, the closer you get to the Great Sea, or the closer you'll get a connection to Nehru and Hylia. Because Hylia and Nehru are basically the same archetype. It's the same character, essentially archetypally. But they're two different goddesses in the mythology. But
to get rid of...
But that said, the three goddesses, to an extent, if you look at them, they should probably be one goddess to an extent. But the fact that there was, like Eru Iluvatar, but the fact that there was the decision to split them into three goddesses. Now, if you were to psychoanalyze the Japanese, you might say that's got its roots also in Tsukuyomi, Suzano, and Amaterasu, given that the Shinto religion of Japan was once alongside its sister religions, the Japanese variant of Buddhism, and I think it was Confucianism, are the traditional religions of Japan. That said, the three goddesses are not in personality like those deities of Japanese mythology. They all three have more connotations with Brigid. It's essentially taking the Brigid goddess of Gaelic mythology and splitting her into three. And yeah, but I think we've blathered on long enough, and we've begun to delve more into the nature of the goddesses than what we probably should have, and gone into quote or unquote Darunia, who's not a character I would trust with in any way with any information that's viable. But that said, the Zor are very clear on their information. Same with the Great Deku Tree.
My point was that the Gorons, they don't really get as much with Nehru.
But they don't have much contact with Aurora either.
Exactly.
But they would have probably more in common with Nehru. Water. They need water a lot to cool the metal that they forge.
That's true.
But the Gorons themselves are basically archetypally the dwarves of in a way, because they're born from deep in the bowels of the earth, and they have a connection to the earth, and they go digging deeply into it. This is kind of what the dwarves do in Norse mythology, because the dwarves are born from under the veins of Ymir and come out from beneath the earth in Norse mythology. So it's kind of the same kind of relationship. But anyways, so just to hammer it out, and basically TLDR, three golden goddesses create the earth, or Hyrule, I should say, and they leave in charge of the world the goddess Hylia. She's slain, I guess you'd say, and reincarnated into Zelda, and who's later reincarnated into later generations of Zelda. Demise the great demon king is and reincarnated into Ganon or Ganondorf. But then you've got, on the other hand, a guardian of time who's been put with time flowing, almost time being the kind of thing that binds the world together, it seems, with Tia being put in charge of keeping an eye on time, but the timeline eventually splits. This is the overall idea of how Hyrule works and its timeline. So now that we've analyzed the creation of Hyrule, if we ever, or when we go to do another live stream, it'll probably note the events of Skyward Sword, which would be a more fitting continuation, because this was supposed to just be about the creation of the world, and we got off topic. But we'll deal with Demise and his story. Even Majora probably will have to get into, basically demons and whatnot, and the creation of that weird floating country of Skyward Sword. I don't fully get it. I haven't played the game. I'll have to look up the game and listen to some walkthroughs of it. I don't have access to the game. And after that, we'll have to get into the founding of Hyrule. But as it is, we have to cook supper, and we wish everyone the very best. And, well, sorry, I had to do that. I love the music of Hyrule. And forget to smash that like and that subscribe button to stay tuned for more content, and to tell us in the comment section what you liked and what you didn't like. And do take care, everyone.